The dream started 3 weeks before I ever set foot in booth 19. Always the same. I was standing inside a small lit box, fluorescent lights humming overhead, a sliding window to my left, a cash drawer in front of me. Outside was pure dark, like someone had painted the world black past the edge of the booth's light. Texas highway stretched in both directions, flat and empty. Then headlights appeared in the distance. They moved slow. Too slow for a highway. They crept toward the booth like whoever was driving wasn't sure they wanted to arrive. The radio behind me was playing something country, crackling with static. And then between the notes, a voice cut through, calm and flat, like a recorded message. Don't look directly at the driver. I always woke up before the car reached the window. I'd sit up in the dark of my apartment, heart hammering, shirt soaked through. The dream left me feeling wrong in a way I couldn't name. Not scared exactly, more like the feeling you get when you forget to torque a bolt and only remember it after the car's already back on the road. That low, sick dread of something you can't take back. I had bigger problems to worry about, though. Bills had a way of making you forget about bad dreams real quick. I lost my job at Castillo's Auto on a Tuesday in early October. Mr. Castillo sat me down and told me he was sorry, that business was slow, that I was the last hire so I'd be the first cut. He said it like he'd rehearsed it. I shook his hand, cleaned out my locker, and drove home with the windows down because the AC in my Silverado had needed a recharge for 2 months, and I kept putting it off. 28 years old, no savings worth talking about, a stack of bills on my kitchen table that I'd been rearranging instead of paying. 3 weeks before my rent came due, and I'd have nothing to cover it. I started looking that same afternoon. Job boards, Craigslist, calls to every shop I'd done side work for. Mostly nothing. My cousin Ernesto called on a Thursday night. He was living in Lockhart by then, working at Ramos Brothers Automotive off 183. I told him what happened with Castillo's, and he went quiet for a moment. "You know how to run a cash register?" he asked. "I mean, yeah. There's a posting for a night shift toll collector on SH130, the extension past Mustang Ridge. They pay $12.50 an hour and the job comes with housing. Some studio apartment in Lockhart. I drive past that booth sometimes. Booth 19. He paused. Lights are always on out there. $12.50 wasn't great, but free housing plus $12.50 was better than nothing. I asked him to send me the link and applied before I went to sleep. 2 days later, a man named Bill Thornton called, shift supervisor for the SH130 extension. He asked about my work history, whether I had a valid license, whether I had issues with overnight shifts. I said no to that last one. "Most people quit inside the first month," Thornton said. "It's not glamorous. You sit in a booth in the middle of nowhere for 12 hours. Traffic at night on that stretch is light. Mostly just you in the darkness." He paused like that was a selling point. "But the pay's consistent and the apartment's included. You interested?" I said yes. I moved to Lockhart on the 15th. Ernesto helped me load my truck. The apartment was above a hardware store on Commerce Street. 1 room, narrow bathroom, 2-burner kitchenette. It smelled like whoever had it before smoked indoors, but the windows opened and the heater worked. "It's not bad," Ernesto said, standing in the middle of the room like he was looking for something to compliment. "It's temporary," I said. That night I had the dream again. Same booth, same slow headlights, same flat voice through the static. Don't look directly at the driver. I woke at 20 past 3 and lay there watching the ceiling until my alarm went off. Orientation was a half day in Kyle. A woman named Sandra walked me through the computer system, the cash drawer, emergency procedures. She pointed to a number on the laminated card she gave me. "There's a dedicated emergency phone in the booth. Old hardline. For serious situations, power outages, accidents in the lanes." She said it matter-of-factly. "It doesn't get used much." Nothing strange. Completely normal. I remember thinking it was almost boring, and I remember feeling relieved about that. I met Daryl on the evening of October 17th, just after sundown. He was already inside the booth when I pulled into the gravel lot. White-haired, thin, hunched over on a stool like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. His eyes had deep dark circles under them, the kind you only get from months of not sleeping right. He looked like a man waiting for something to be over. Thornton introduced us and left pretty quickly. Just said, "Daryl will walk you through the booth specifics," and drove off. No real handshake, no lingering. He seemed in a hurry to be somewhere that wasn't booth 19. The booth was smaller than I'd imagined. Metal frame, sliding service window, cash drawer, computer terminal, a radio on a small shelf, a hardback stool that would ruin your back inside 2 weeks, an old telephone mounted to the side wall with a curly cord. Daryl showed me the computer system, the transaction process where the receipt rolls were kept. He was thorough but quiet, each word like it cost him something. When he finished, he stood looking out through the service window at the highway for a moment. The flat dark fields, the mesquite trees out there in the last thin light. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it on the desk and slid it toward me with 2 fingers. His hand was shaking. Not a lot, but enough to notice. The handwriting matched. Cramped and hurried, like someone who needed to get the words down before something stopped them. 7 items, numbered 1 through 7. I read through all of them and looked up at him. "What is this?" I asked. "Those are the real rules for the night shift," he said. "I don't care what they told you in orientation. Follow these and you'll be fine. Ignore them." He let it hang. "Just don't." I looked back at the list. Rules about never leaving the booth between 1 and 5 in the morning. About closing the window if headlights flashed in a certain pattern. About what to say if the emergency phone asked a specific question. About pretending not to see things moving in the fields outside. 7 rules in total, each one strange, each one specific. "If you know how to stay safe out here," I said slowly, "why are you leaving?" He looked back out at the highway. A pickup rolled through the lane, nothing unusual. He waited until it cleared. "Because eventually," he said, "everybody makes a mistake." He left 20 minutes before his shift officially ended. I watched his taillights shrink down the highway and disappear, and then it was just me and the fluorescent hum and the dark pressing in from all sides. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. The job was exactly what Thornton described. Boring in a way that was almost physical. Traffic after midnight was thin, an occasional 18-wheeler, a few late commuters, sometimes nobody for 30 minutes at a stretch. I brought my laptop, watched shows, browsed Reddit, drank too much coffee. I followed the rules the way you might knock on wood, not because you believe it does anything, but because it doesn't cost you anything either. By the end of the 2nd week, I had all 7 memorized without trying. When you're sitting in a 10x6 box for 12 hours, a list of 7 items burns into your brain whether you intend it or not. 3rd week of October, Thursday, 2:13 in the morning. The emergency phone rang. 2 sharp rings. I stared at it before picking up. "Booth 19, I said, the way Sandra had told me. Silence. Then a voice, distorted, broken up by static, like a bad cell connection. Except this was a hard line, and hard lines don't crackle like that. "Is this the way to San Antonio?" I knew Rule 3. I had it memorized. I knew exactly what it said. And I still gave directions, real ones. I told the voice to take I-35 south, that they'd hit San Antonio in about 40 minutes. Silence again. Then the voice came back. Lower this time. Wetter, somehow. Like it was coming through something other than a phone. The same question, the exact same words, but different in a way that was hard to name. The way a word looks wrong when you stare at it too long and it stops looking real. Except this was a voice, and it stopped sounding like a person. "Is this the way to San Antonio?" "Stay on I-35, I said. The words from Rule 3, the ones I should have said the first time. The line went dead. I set the phone down. My heart was faster than it should have been. I told myself it was a prank call, a drunk, someone messing around at 2 in the morning. I opened my laptop and tried to watch something. I don't think I took in a single frame. The next night, just past 3, headlights appeared in the toll lane. That wasn't unusual. The pattern was 2 quick flashes, a pause, 3 quick flashes, a pause, 2 quick flashes again, deliberate and even, like something practiced. I knew Rule 2. Close the service window, look down at your desk. Don't look up until you hear it pass. I hesitated. The car was still far down the lane, still running that pattern, and I sat there watching it come. I don't know what I was waiting for. Part of me thought I'd see a laughing driver, proof it was just someone screwing with the new guy. The rules were probably a hazing joke anyway. The car stopped at the window. I could make out a shape behind the wheel. Not any detail, just a shape. Then someone tapped on the glass. 3 slow, patient taps. I closed the service window. Finally. Too late by 30 seconds, but I closed it and looked down at my desk the way Rule 2 said. Hands flat on the counter, eyes on my hands. A voice came from outside, muffled but almost friendly, asking for directions. To San Antonio. Same question as the phone the night before. I kept my eyes down. Something dragged across the glass. Not fingernails. Longer, harder. It moved from one end of the service window to the other, slow and deliberate, leaving that high, thin scrape you feel in your back teeth, like a key across a car door. Then the car pulled away. I sat still for what felt like a full minute. When I finally looked up at the service window, I could see 5 long scratches running across the outside of the glass. Parallel, evenly spaced. Deep enough that I could feel the grooves when I pressed my fingertip to the inside surface. I called Daryl. He picked up on the second ring. He hadn't been sleeping. I could tell from how fast he answered. Too quick, too ready. I described the phone call and the car. When I finished, there was a pause. "You broke Rule 3, he said. Not a question. Yeah. They always call new collectors. Every time within the first month. They want to see what you do." His voice was flat and tired. "They know about you now. Once they notice you, things escalate. They test, they push, they see how much you'll break." A pause. "And leaving doesn't fix it. Once they notice you, you don't get to walk away clean. Being out there with the rules is safer than being out in the world without them." I didn't say anything. "Follow all 7, Daryl said. "Every time. Don't test them again." Another pause. "I'm sorry, kid." He hung up. That same night, I was sitting in the booth just past 1 in the morning when I looked up from my laptop toward the eastern side of the glass. The open fields out there, mesquite trees scattered low across the dark, completely unremarkable during the day. Something was moving between them. Not a coyote, not a deer. The movement was wrong for a deer. Too upright, too steady. Something tall and thin crossing through the mesquite from north to south at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, jerky and smooth at the same time, like 2 things that didn't belong together had been stitched into one. Rule 4. Pretend you don't see it. Do not acknowledge it. I looked back at my laptop screen. I pulled up whatever I'd been watching, read the captions without understanding them, kept my eyes forward, did not look back at the fields. For an hour I felt watched. Not the paranoid kind you can argue yourself out of, the specific physical feeling of being looked at, where the back of your neck goes tight and something in your gut already knows. I kept my hands on the desk where I could see them, and I did not move. At 2:10, the feeling faded, like pressure letting off, slow and gradual. I let out a long breath. The rest of the shift passed without incident. At 5 in the morning, the sun came up over the flat horizon, and the dark bled out of the fields, and the mesquite trees were just mesquite trees again. I looked at the 5 scratches on my service window, still clear in the morning light. I thought about what Daryl had said, about not walking away clean. Whatever was out there already knew my name, and now it knew I'd seen it. I came back the next night with a thermos of coffee and a different mindset. That's not entirely accurate. I came back because I needed the job and had nowhere else to go, but I told myself it was resolve. It felt better that way. The scratches were still on the service window. 5 parallel lines, clear as anything in the fluorescent light. I ran my finger along the inside of the glass and felt the ridges. I don't know what I expected, that maybe I'd imagined them, or that someone from the day shift had cleaned them off. But they were there, real and deep, and no fingernail had any business making marks like that. I set up my laptop, poured my coffee, and went through all 7 rules one more time in my head. Then I opened Daryl's paper and read them off the page too, just to be sure. I wasn't treating them like a joke anymore. Around 11:30, a Chevy Silverado rolled through the lane, big white one, cracked left headlight. The driver was maybe late 50s, wide through the shoulders, a Texan's cap pulled low. He handed me a card. It declined, and he dug around in his center console for cash while I waited. "You the new night collector?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He found a crumpled 10 and passed it through. "How long you been on this stretch?" "About a month." He nodded like that meant something. "You keeping salt in your pockets?" I looked at him. "What?" "Rock salt. Some people keep it on them when they drive this stretch late." He took his change without counting it. "Gets mighty strange out here after midnight. Always has." He glanced past me toward the dark fields on the eastern side of the booth, and something in his face tightened. Then he put the truck in gear. "Keep the salt on you, son." He drove off before I could ask anything else. I didn't have salt, not yet. 3:17 came the way it always did. Slow and then all at once, like the clock had been stalling and then gave up. I turned the radio off. Rule 6. 3 minutes of silence every night. The booth felt smaller without the radio. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of wind moving across the flat highway. I kept my eyes on the desk and waited. About 90 seconds in, the radio made a sound. Not music, static. A low, crackling hiss that built slowly and then shaped itself into something close to a voice. "We see you, collector." Flat and even, like someone reading off a card. "We know you answered wrongly. We know you hesitated at the window." I said nothing. Rule 6 was specific. Do not respond to voices from the radio while it's off. "Look outside. We want you to see us." I stared at my hands and counted seconds. 43, 44, 45. The static kept going, but the voice didn't speak again. At the 3-minute mark, I turned the radio back on. Some country station out of Austin mid-song. I turned it up a little louder than I normally would. I did not look outside. Not for the next 20 minutes. When I finally did, the fields were empty, or at least nothing was moving in them that I could see. Around 2 in the morning, a Honda Civic pulled into the lane. Small, white, older model. The driver was a young woman, maybe early 20s, dark hair, dressed like she'd been out somewhere. She held out her hand through the window without looking up and passed me exact change. The coins hit my palm, and I nearly dropped them. They were burning hot. Not warm, hot, like they'd been sitting on a stove burner, the kind of heat that makes your hand pull back before your brain has even caught up. I remembered Rule 5. I tilted my hand and let them fall directly into the cash drawer. My palm was already stinging. I looked down and saw 5 small red circles rising into blisters, 1 for each coin. When I looked back up, the woman was still there. Most drivers leave as soon as the transaction's done. She was looking at me now. Dark eyes, pretty enough face, smiling. The smile was too wide. The corners of it stretched further than a smile had any right to go, pulling at the edges of her mouth like something was working at it from the inside. I glanced at the back of her car. No license plate. "Have a good night," I said, keeping my voice even. She kept smiling. Then she drove away. I looked at my palm for a long moment. 5 blisters, the exact size and shape of quarters. Whatever was sending these things knew where I was, knew my lane number, had gotten close enough to hand me something directly. That was not a comfortable thought. 5 in the morning. Danger hours over. The sky to the east was going from black to a deep gray blue, and the first early commuters were beginning to come through. The emergency phone rang. I stared at it. Past the window. Outside the rules Daryl had written down. It wasn't supposed to call after the danger hours. It never had before. I picked it up. "You think it ends at dawn, Collector?" Same distorted voice, the wet, wrong quality underneath it. "The old rules are changing. We're coming for you tonight." The line went dead. I set the phone down carefully. I sat on the stool and looked at the blisters on my hand and the scratches on the window and listened to the morning birds starting up out in the fields, and I understood clearly that this wasn't going to stop on its own. After my shift, I drove into Lockhart and went looking for a local history library. A woman at the gas station on Main pointed me to the Caldwell County Public Library on San Antonio Street. The librarian's name was Margaret. She was in her 60s, silver-streaked hair, glasses on a chain, the kind of woman who looked like she'd been behind that same desk her whole life. When I asked about the history of the SH-130 corridor, specifically disappearances or unusual incidents, something shifted in her expression. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she'd been waiting for someone to ask. She took me through a door behind the main desk into a back room that wasn't open to the public. Small space, smelled like old paper and dust. Bankers' boxes on shelves labeled by decade, and one whole wall covered in newspaper clippings pinned under plastic sheeting. I stood there reading headlines. Missing persons stretching back decades. An Austin American Statesman piece from 1974, something older from a Lockhart Weekly in 1931. "How far back does this go?" I asked. 1887, Margaret said. She took a box down from a shelf and set it on the table. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a leather journal. She opened it carefully to a page near the middle. The handwriting was in Spanish, cramped and old-fashioned, and at the bottom of the page was a sketch. I recognized the shape right away. Tall and emaciated, branching antlers spread wide, a face too long to be human. I'd only ever seen it from the corner of my eye through the booth glass, moving through the mesquite. But I knew it. "The Tonkawa who lived on these lands called it Daymak," Margaret said. "It means roughly the hunger that walks. The Spanish settlers called it El que alimenta, the one who feeds. Some people around here still call it a Wendigo, though that word doesn't quite fit." She closed the journal. "It's older than any of those names." "What is it exactly?" "Nobody knows completely. That's the honest answer." She took her glasses off and let them hang on the chain. "It was here long before Europeans arrived. The tribes who lived here managed it. They had rituals, taboos, specific ways of keeping it satisfied without letting it hunt freely. When the settlers disrupted that, people started disappearing." She nodded toward the clippings. "When TXDOT built SH-130, the construction disturbed something that had gone dormant. It woke back up. And the state just... The state knows," she said. Her voice was flat in a way that meant she'd been angry about it for a long time and had run out of anger. "They keep the booth staffed because an occasional missing toll worker every few years is cheaper than rerouting a major highway. They don't advertise that reasoning." I told her about the phone call that morning, the coins, the scratches. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she went to a cabinet and came back with a cloth bag. Inside, a Ziploc bag of rock salt, coarse-grained, and 4 iron nails, hand-forged by the look of them, heavy and dark. "Salt across the threshold," she said. "Nails at the 4 corners of the booth, wedged tight. Keep them there every night." She paused, hands flat on the table. "There's also an 8th rule. It wasn't on Daryl's list. I'm telling you now because I think you may need it before long." She told me what it was. I won't write all the details here. There's a reason it wasn't on the list. But it involved blood and something she called a free offering. "Only if everything else fails," she said. "Everything else first. This is a last measure." I asked her how she knew all of this. She looked at the clipping board for a moment. My brother worked booth 19 in 1979. There wasn't enough of him left to bury. She said it quietly, the way you say something you've said to yourself 10,000 times until it lost its shape. I've been keeping this room for 45 years, waiting for the next collector who came looking. I took the salt and the nails and thanked her. That night, I prepared the booth before my shift officially started. Salt along the threshold, thin enough that passing drivers wouldn't notice. Iron nails wedged at each corner of the frame. I hung a St. Christopher medal from the rearview mirror of my truck and then, feeling slightly ridiculous, wrote a phrase in Spanish across my left forearm with a marker, something my grandmother used to say when she was frightened, a protective phrase she'd gotten from her own grandmother. I had no idea if it would do anything. I did it anyway. At 12:47, the tall shape moved through the fields again. I looked at my computer screen and kept it there. An 18-wheeler rolled through around 1. The driver had a beard going gray and looked at me a little longer than most drivers do before handing over his card. "You all right, son?" he asked. "You look like you're expecting something." "Long night," I said. He took his card back and glanced out toward the dark fields. "My buddy Ramirez drives this stretch. Said something followed his rig for 20 miles last week. Stayed just outside the edge of his headlights the whole way." He shook his head. "Ramirez doesn't spook easy." He held out a small wooden cross through the window. Simple, no bigger than my palm, the kind from a church gift shop. "Keep that on you." I took it. "Gracias." He drove on. I set the cross next to the nails on the corner of the desk and tried not to think too hard about the fact that a stranger on a highway had handed me a cross like it was the most natural thing in the world. At 1:13, the emergency phone rang. Earlier than before, still inside the danger window, but 1:13 felt different from 2:13, more deliberate, like something had been calculating. I picked it up. "We're coming, Collector. Your salt and your iron won't save you." I recited the phrase from my forearm under my breath. Quiet, just my lips moving. Something on the other end made a sound. It took me a second to recognize it as laughing. "Look outside," it said. "I'm wearing a face, you know." I held the phone and did not look outside. My free hand was flat on the counter. "Come on, Marcos, just look. I came all this way." I looked. I couldn't stop myself. It said my name, and then it used that voice, and my eyes went to the window before I'd decided to let them. The figure stood at the edge of the light, maybe 60 feet out, just past where the lampposts ended. It was Ernesto. His height, his build, the way he stood with his weight shifted slightly left. His face, the eyes were wrong, too large, catching the light at a wrong angle, and the arms hung a little too long. But the face was my cousin's face. "Come out, Primo," it said. "I need to talk to you." My hand was flat on the counter. I was not moving toward the door. The figure tilted its head, then it shimmered, like heat rising off summer asphalt, a ripple through the air, and the shape that came out the other side was different. It was my mother, her height, her posture, the way she stood when she was tired but didn't want to show it. Her hair, her face, the sweater she wore on cold evenings. "Marcos, mi hijo." Her voice. Exactly her voice. "Please, I need your help. Come outside." I gripped the counter hard enough that my knuckles ached. "You're not her," I said. The figure stood at the edge of the light and looked at me with my mother's face and eyes. Then it took one step back, and the dark took it. I looked at the clock. 1:27. 3 hours and 43 minutes until 5. I sat down on the stool. The booth hummed around me. The radio played something I wasn't hearing. The salt line at the threshold was unbroken. The nails were where I'd put them. The wooden cross sat on the corner of the desk. Somewhere past the lampposts, in the dark between the mesquite trees, it was waiting. It had all the time in the world. I survived the rest of that second night the same way you survive a bad shift at a job you can't quit, minute by minute, eyes forward, telling yourself it's temporary. The figure wearing my mother's face stayed at the edge of the lamppost light until almost 3 in the morning. I know because I watched the clock more than I watched the window. At 2:58, I glanced out and it was gone. No shimmer, no retreating footsteps, just gone, like someone had switched a channel. I did the 3:17 silence. Heard nothing from the dead radio speakers. When 5 o'clock finally came, I sat outside on the gravel next to my truck and watched the sun come up and breathed morning air that smelled like dew and highway concrete. Something in my shoulders unwound for the first time since 1:13. I went home, slept 4 hours, drove back. That was 2 nights ago. This is what happened on the 3rd night. Around 2 in the morning, headlights appeared in the lane. Not flashing, that was the first thing I checked by reflex at this point. Regular headlights, normal speed. I relaxed a little. Then I glanced at the small rear-view mirror I'd propped on the side of my desk. I'd positioned it 2 days ago to give me a wider view of incoming traffic. One more thing to keep me from being caught off guard. I caught the license plate as the truck rolled into the lane. LVS 2HNT, the blue pickup from Rule 7. I looked back at my computer screen immediately. Rule 7 was clear. Process the toll, no eye contact. I pulled up the transaction screen and kept my head angled down and waited. The truck stopped at the window. The driver's side window rolled down. In my peripheral vision, I could make out a worn cowboy hat, a weathered jaw, a flannel shirt gone soft from washing. Older man. He held out the exact cash amount without me having to say the total first. I took it, logged it, printed the receipt, kept my eyes on the drawer. "Rough few nights?" he asked. His voice had a thick Texas drawl, slow and easy, like someone who'd spent his whole life in no hurry. I didn't answer. "Son," he said, "I'm not one of them. I want to be clear about that up front." He didn't move to drive on. "Think of me as a middleman. Rule 7 didn't specifically say not to talk, just no eye contact." "What kind of middleman?" I asked. "The kind that's been managing a certain situation on this road for a long time." He set his elbow on the window frame, relaxed and patient. "The hungry one grows bolder every year. It's been restless since the highway went in. Some of us have been keeping it in check, following older rules, making certain arrangements, keeping the losses smaller than they'd be otherwise." A pause. "It's noticed you specifically now. That makes things more complicated for everybody." "I gathered that," I said. "You've been smarter than most." He was quiet for a moment. "But smart only holds so long without the right tools. Salt and iron slow it down, they don't stop it. You're going to need to make a decision before long about what you want to do with what's coming." I almost looked up at him. I stopped myself. "Check your back pocket when I leave," he said. He put the truck in gear. "And go rinse your face, like it says." He pulled out of the lane and drove south. I stood at the service window and watched his taillights disappear. Then I went to the small bathroom at the back of the booth and ran cold water over my face until my pulse settled down. I dried off with a paper towel, reached into my back pocket, and my fingers found a coin. I hadn't put it there. I was certain, checking my pockets before every shift had become habit, the same way I'd always checked for loose change before working on an engine. That pocket had been empty 2 hours ago. I took it out and held it under the fluorescent light. Silver, about the size of a quarter, but thicker and heavier. No markings I recognized. Not any currency I'd ever handled. The surface was plain and worn smooth, like something very old that a lot of hands had touched over a long time. I expected it to be warm from sitting against my body. It was cold. Distinctly, uncomfortably cold, like it had come out of a freezer. I wrapped it in a paper towel and set it on the corner of the desk and looked at it for a while. 40 minutes later, I needed to use the bathroom again. Too much coffee. I was gone maybe 2 minutes. The bathroom was at the back of the booth, attached, part of the same structure. I didn't leave the building. When I came back out, the salt line at the threshold was wrong. I'd laid it carefully and even across the interior doorframe, a thin, consistent line of coarse rock salt that I'd been redoing every shift since Margaret gave it to me. Now there was a gap in the middle of it, about 3 inches wide. clean-edged, like something had stepped through precisely, putting each foot carefully on either side of the gap rather than dragging through. I stood still and did not move for a full 10 seconds. The booth smelled different. Underneath the usual coffee smell was something else. Wet fur and copper, faint but unmistakable, low in the air like it was coming from the floor. I recognized it from Margaret's description before I consciously identified it. Some animal part of my brain had already figured it out and was trying to back me toward the wall. I checked the corners. The nail in the far right corner had shifted, still wedged in the frame but angled the wrong direction, like something had nudged it out of position, testing it maybe, seeing if it would come loose. It hadn't come all the way out, but it had moved. I looked at the coin on the desk, still there, still wrapped in the paper towel. I rebuilt the salt line slowly and evenly, hands moving steady even though my breathing wasn't. I used more salt this time, thick enough that you'd have to drag your foot deliberately to break it. I repositioned the nail. I didn't speak. The wet fur smell faded over the next few minutes, slowly, the way a smell dissipates when whatever was making it moves away. I sat back on the stool and put my hand flat on the desk and focused on keeping it still. Whatever had been in the booth while I was in the back had come in and touched things and left. It had done that quietly, carefully, while I was 12 feet away. That was a new kind of bad. At 12 minutes past 3, the gravel outside began crunching. Slow, heavy footsteps circling the perimeter of the booth. I could track them by sound as they moved around each wall. They were deliberate, unhurried, like something taking a walk it had taken many times before. When the steps passed the eastern wall, I could hear them most clearly. Uneven weight, a slight drag on every third step. Then the footsteps stopped outside the service window, and a voice came from just beyond the glass. "The salt line is mended, Marcos, but we were already inside." I did not move toward the window. "The iron grows cold when we are near. You know that now." The voice was wrong the same way all the other voices had been wrong, but worse. 2 different sounds sharing the same space, one smooth and one wet, layered over each other. "One look. Just look at us. We only want you to see." I picked up the coin from the desk, still wrapped in the paper towel, and held it in my fist. "Not interested," I said. Something dragged along the outer wall. Not fast, slow, like it was measuring the length of the booth. The scraping sound moved from the south corner to the north corner and stopped. "Your protections bought you nights," the voice said. "Each night costs you more than the last. You feel it already. The tightness, the watching." A pause. "Look at us, Marcos Ruiz. We are patient. We have always been patient. But patience ends." I unfolded the paper where I'd written my grandmother's phrase and read it quietly, lips barely moving. Twice, then a third time. The footsteps on the gravel slowed, then stopped completely. A long silence outside. Then nothing. No sound at all from that side of the booth, which felt worse than the circling had. I stayed on the stool and kept the coin in my hand and waited. 3:17. I turned off the radio. Hands on the desk, coin in my right hand, paper towel wrapped around it, eyes on the wall in front of me. Silence for maybe 20 seconds. Then I felt breath on the back of my neck. There was nothing behind me but the bathroom door and a solid wall. I knew that. The sensation was there anyway, cold and slow and steady against my skin, close enough that whatever was making it would have had to be standing at my shoulder. The temperature in the booth dropped fast. I could see the fog of my own exhale. A crescent of frost formed along the top edge of the service window, spreading outward in fine branching lines. A voice spoke from directly beside my ear. Not the radio, not the phone. From the air, maybe 6 inches from my face. "The old rules no longer bind us, Marcos Ruiz. We have grown beyond them, evolved, adapted." A pause where the cold deepened. "The salt is an inconvenience. The iron is a memory. Your phrases are sounds with no teeth left. Another pause, slower. Your soul will feed us for 100 years. I gripped the coin through the paper towel and held it tight. The cold spiked, sudden and sharp, like plunging your arm into ice water past the elbow. I felt the coin push back against the presence beside me. That's the only way I could describe it. A resistance, like holding two magnets wrong end to wrong end. The harder you push them together, the harder they push apart. The presence moved, didn't leave, moved. Further, maybe a foot, then two. Where did you get that? The voice was different now. Still wrong, still wet at the edges, but something behind it that I hadn't heard before. Not anger exactly. More like something old being reminded it could still be surprised. Someone left it for me, I said. Silence. The frost on the service window began melting in slow drips. The temperature crept back up. At the 3-minute mark, I turned the radio back on and kept the coin in my hand for another 10 minutes before I set it back down. At 3:41, 3 vehicles came down the lane, a minivan in front, then a Gap, then a beige sedan. Then, after another Gap, a motorcycle. Regular spacing, regular speed, nothing unusual from a distance, the kind of traffic that came through at this hour a couple times a week. The blue pickup reappeared from the shoulder of the highway, rolling slowly into the space beside the lane, off the traffic flow. The blue hunter climbed out and leaned against the hood with his arms crossed and his hat pulled forward, looking down at the asphalt. "You've still got the coin," he said. "Yeah," I said through the service window. "Good." He didn't look up. "Here's where we are. It wants you to choose one of those 3 vehicles. Leave a gap in your protections. Pull the nail from one corner. Don't redo the salt line after your break. Let it take what it's going to take. In exchange, it leaves you alone for good." He shifted his weight. "It's not a good arrangement, but it's a clear one." The minivan was closer now. I could see a car seat shape in the back window. "No," I said. "Marcos." "No." He was quiet. The minivan kept coming. I was thinking fast, the way you think when a car's on your lift and something's wrong and you have 30 seconds to identify it before the owner comes back. I had the coin. I had what Margaret had told me about Rule 8. I had the thing the voice had said about feeding cycles. What if it had something more regular, I said, more consistent than hunting? What if it didn't need them because it was already being fed? The blue hunter's head tilted slightly, still not looking at me. "Say what you mean." "Weekly, not monthly, not one person. Weekly blood offerings. Small ones, freely given, not taken. 3 drops on the coin every week. More frequent than it's been getting. More reliable than random hunting." I was building the logic as fast as I could. That's a steadier supply. Engines run better on a consistent fuel line than on surges and droughts. A long silence. The sedan was close now. The cold came back, not the air beside my ear kind, but a broader presence, spreading from outside the booth across the whole structure. The service window frosted over in a full crescent this time, heavier than before. The smell of wet fur and copper pushed through the glass seal. Something very large was right outside. Considering. "More frequent feedings." The voice came from every wall at once. That could satisfy. For a time, a pause that felt like something measuring. "But you cannot do this alone. One keeper bleeds dry. A single tether phrase. You will need others. A group, each giving a small amount so that no one gives everything." "How many?" I asked. "Enough. You have 1 month to begin building what is needed. If you fail to begin, the arrangement ends and we take what we require without bargaining." The minivan reached my window. I processed the toll, smiled at the driver, a tired-looking woman, 2 kids asleep in the back. She drove through. The sedan came, elderly man, nodded at me without speaking. He drove through. The motorcycle last, a young guy in a blue helmet who didn't look up from the road. He rode through and his taillight shrank down the dark highway. I looked at the coin on my desk. I found a thumbtack in the pencil cup, pressed the point into the pad of my left thumb. It hurt less than I expected, a quick, sharp sting. I held the coin flat on my palm and turned my thumb over it and let 3 drops fall on the surface. Then I thought about what was being asked of me long term, about the month deadline, about the 3 vehicles that had just passed, and I let 6 more drops fall. 9 total. Triple. To seal it in a way that couldn't be argued with. The coin absorbed them. The silver surface went dull red, not from the blood sitting on top, but from underneath, like the metal itself had changed. Then it faded back to silver and the coin lifted from my palm. That's the part I keep coming back to. It just lifted, smoothly, in less than a blink, and was gone. Nothing visible took it. My palm was empty and the coin was somewhere else. A sound came from outside. Low, resonant, not quite animal, and not quite anything with a name. Then the cold pulled back all at once, like a door closing. The frost on the window melted in streaks. The smell faded. The Blue Hunter got back into his truck. He started the engine and rolled down the window one last time. 1 month, he said. Don't waste it. He turned south and drove until his taillights disappeared and the lane was empty and the night was just a night. I called Margaret at 4:30. Still inside the danger window, still 40 minutes from 5, but I needed to hear a voice that was actually human. She picked up on the 3rd ring, alert, not groggy, the way someone gets when they've been halfway expecting a call for weeks. I told her all of it. The Blue Hunter, the coin appearing in my pocket, the salt line and the nail, the presence at 3:17, the 3 vehicles, the deal I'd made. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. You bought time, she said, for those 3 people tonight, for yourself. A pause. But you understand what you agreed to. I know what I agreed to, I said. The blood is a tether, Marcos. Every week you give it, the connection to you gets a little stronger. It'll know where you are. It'll know when you miss a week. She paused again. The consortium spreads that tether thin enough that no single person carries too much. But you need people who understand what they're agreeing to, who won't panic, who won't run. 1 month, I said. Then we start tomorrow. Come by the library in the morning. I said I would. We hung up. I sat on the stool and looked at my left thumb. The small puncture was barely bleeding anymore, just a red dot the size of a pinhead. I pressed a folded paper towel to it and held it there and watched the dark fields outside the booth. Nothing moving in the mesquite. No footsteps on the gravel. The entity had gotten what it came for and gone back to wherever it went when the bargain was satisfied. I hadn't beaten it tonight. I want to be clear about that. I hadn't outsmarted it or driven it off. I'd offered it a more efficient feeding arrangement, and it had accepted, the way a machine accepts the fuel you put into it without caring where the fuel came from. The thumb stung. The paper towel had a small red spot at the center. I sat in the booth until 5 in the morning, watching headlights pass through the lane, thinking about who I was going to call first. The dream changed somewhere around the 2nd month. It was still booth 19, still 3:17 on the clock above the service window, still the flat dark highway and the fluorescent hum and the approaching headlights moving too slow. But now when I looked out past the edge of the lamppost light, the tall antlered shape wasn't standing there alone. Other shapes flanked it. Human-sized, human-shaped, standing still with their arms at their sides. Something glinted in each of their hands, small and silver, catching the light the way coins do. They stood far enough back that I couldn't make out faces, couldn't tell how many there were exactly. More than a few, less than a crowd. Keepers who came before me. That was the understanding the dream carried with it. The way dreams tell you things without saying them. Keepers who came before me and were no longer keeping anything. I woke from that dream every time with my left thumb throbbing. The first month after the bargain was the hardest. Margaret and I sat in the back room of the library the morning after and worked through the list of people we thought might be reachable. People who either already knew something was wrong on that highway or had a connection to its history that made them more likely to believe. We needed people who wouldn't panic, who had reasons of their own to hold the line. Panic was the engine that broke things. I'd seen enough bad repairs to know that a person who rushed because they were scared always left something loose. Margaret came first, which was already settled. Her brother's name was in one of those newspaper clippings, 1979, and 45 years of keeping that room in the library was its own kind of commitment. Ernesto was harder. I drove to Ramos Brothers on a Tuesday afternoon and asked him to take a late lunch. We sat in his truck in the parking lot and I told him everything from the beginning. He listened without interrupting, which wasn't like him. Ernesto always had something to say. When I finished, he was quiet for almost a full minute, looking out the windshield at nothing in particular. "I've been having a dream," he said finally. "About a toll booth. 3 a.m, some clock on the wall, something outside with antlers." I looked at him. "Started about a month before you called me about the job," he said. I didn't say anything because I thought it was just a weird dream. The coin had chosen me before I ever set foot in the booth. I wondered now if it had been working further out than that, pulling the people it needed into position before the need arrived. That thought sat badly, but I kept it to myself. Ernesto said yes. Bill Thornton was easier than I expected. I called him on a Wednesday and told him I knew about the arrangement and needed help building the consortium the entity had asked for. A long silence on the line, and then, "I figured this call was coming eventually. The last keeper ran. I hoped you wouldn't." He came to the first meeting without needing any more convincing, which told me he'd already known far more than he'd ever said. Officer Ramirez. I found through the trucker who'd given me the wooden cross. He'd mentioned a buddy named Ramirez who drove this stretch, and I'd filed it away. Ramirez turned out to be a Caldwell County deputy who'd been the first responder on 3 separate disappearances along the SH 130 corridor over 7 years. He'd written them up as best he could and watched them go nowhere. And the look in his eyes when I described what lived in the fields was the look of a man finally hearing an explanation for something that had been rotting in his mind for years. He joined. The last 2 were a married couple in their 70s, a man and woman named Carl and Inez Draper, who'd farmed land adjacent to the highway since before the extension was built. Carl had lost a nephew in 2011, one of those disappearances Ramirez had responded to. Inez had grown up hearing her grandmother's stories about what the old-timers called the field walker. They understood the bargain faster than anyone else. When I explained the weekly offering, Carl just nodded slowly and held out his hand to shake mine. 7 total. We started meeting weekly in the back room of Kreutz Market after closing by arrangement with the owner who turned out to be Carl's second cousin and who asked no questions about why they needed the room. For 4 months, the system held. The disappearances on SH 130 stopped. I noticed it first through the absence of news. No more clippings for Margaret's wall. No more calls coming in to Ramirez about abandoned vehicles or missing persons reports with last known location along the extension. Traffic kept moving. The nights in the booth were quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like something had agreed to leave the highway alone. The ritual was simple and stayed simple. Each of us kept a coin, not the original, which I never saw again after that night, but new ones that Margaret sourced through channels she didn't fully explain. Each Wednesday we met and gave 3 drops to our respective coins, and the coins were left on a flat stone behind the Draper farm at the edge of the fields overnight and collected in the morning. The stone had markings on it that predated the Drapers by a long time. Inez wouldn't say how she knew to use it. I didn't push. My thumb healed between Wednesdays, but never fully. A small scar was building in the pad, the puncture site from the thumbtack I still used, a dimple that stayed tender to the touch. I stopped noticing it much. You stop noticing the things that become routine. Then, around the 5th month, the coin started asking for 4 drops. I don't know how else to describe it. The coin didn't speak. But when I offered 3 drops one Wednesday evening and moved to set it down, something resisted. A pressure, like a cold hand around my wrist, not painful but clear, unmistakable. I added a fourth drop and the pressure released. I mentioned it at the next meeting and every other keeper nodded. Same thing, same night. 4 drops, same week, all 7 of us. Margaret looked at the table for a moment and then said, "It always grows," in the flat tone she used when she was delivering a fact she'd known for a long time and had hoped wouldn't arrive yet. The Blue Hunter came back to the booth on a Thursday night in the 5th month. Same truck, same slow roll into the lane, same worn hat angled down. I processed the toll without looking up. He didn't move to leave right away. "Bargain's holding," he said. "For now." "I know," I said. 7 keepers, weekly offerings. That's more than most consortiums managed in the first year. He shifted in his seat. "But you should know it's paying closer attention now, not just to the road, to each of you. Learning schedules, learning who matters to who." A pause. "It's patient in a way that's easy to forget when things are quiet." I kept my eyes on the transaction screen. "What do we do when 4 drops becomes 5? "Find more keepers," he said, "or the drops get larger." He put the truck in gear. "It doesn't have a ceiling, son. That's the part people never want to hear." He drove off. I went and rinsed my face in cold water for a long time. Margaret had been digging into historical records for months. Older accounts, things from before the newspaper era. She found reference to similar arrangements in 3 other places. A river crossing in Gonzales County in the 1840s, a stage road in Bastrop County before that, and something along the old Camino Real that went back further than she could fully trace. Each had a group maintaining a bargain. Each group showed up in the records for a span of years and then stopped appearing entirely. None of them lasted indefinitely, she told me at one of the Wednesday meetings. Carl and Inez were there, Ernesto, Ramirez, Thornton, all of us around the back table at Kreutz, the place closed and dark beyond the single light above us. Someone always breaks faith eventually. Someone gets frightened and runs. Someone decides they can use it rather than just contain it. Someone gets greedy. Or makes a mistake, Ernesto said. He was looking at me. Or makes a mistake, Margaret agreed. I thought about Daryl saying the same words on the first night I met him. The way it had sounded like something he'd been repeating to himself for years. We didn't talk about what happened to the previous groups when they dissolved. We didn't need to. The dream came differently in the 6th month. I was in the booth, same as always, 3:17, the clock, the headlights in the distance. But this time the dream kept going past where it usually ended. The headlights stopped outside and the service window frosted over, and then I was somewhere else without any transition. A hospital room, bright and white and smelling like antiseptic. Daryl was in the bed. I recognized him by his white hair, his build. His face was turned away. His hands were on top of the blanket, bandaged from the palms to the wrists. When he turned toward me, I looked away before I could see his eyes clearly, but I'd already seen enough. The bandages extended up past his brow. He'd been in Houston. I'd heard through Thornton, a psychiatric facility, admitted 6 weeks after he left Booth 19. The official record said self-harm. Thornton hadn't elaborated, and I hadn't asked him to. In the dream, the room around Daryl dissolved, and I was standing somewhere else. Outdoors, flat land, night sky. A field of something that had been cut low, like old crop stubble. I could see shapes in the field. People standing, evenly spaced, 10 of them maybe, each holding a coin the way you'd hold something that burned. Their faces were... I woke up. I lay on my back in the apartment above the hardware store and stared at the ceiling and waited for my heart to slow down. What I'd seen in those faces before I woke, in the second before the dream ended. It wasn't pain exactly. It was the particular expression of people who had been doing something for so long that they had worn through every feeling about it and were just doing it now, by habit, by obligation, because the alternative was worse. The faces of people maintaining something endless. I lay there for a while. Then I got up and made coffee. That night I drove to Booth 19 for my shift. I set up the laptop, poured coffee from my thermos, laid the salt line at the threshold with the care I'd developed over 6 months of nightly practice. Iron nails at the 4 corners, wedged tight. The wooden cross the trucker had given me still sat on the corner of the desk. I'd stopped writing the Spanish phrase on my forearm around month 3. Not because I'd stopped believing in it, but because I'd learned I could say it from memory without needing the reminder. The coin sat in the center of the desk. Margaret had given me a small stand for it. A piece of folded copper bent into a curve that held the silver coin upright, just easier than having it roll around. I looked at it sometimes between vehicles and tried to feel something about what it represented. Mostly I just felt tired. 3:17 came. I turned off the radio, sat quietly for 3 minutes, heard nothing from the dead speakers, turned it back on. Regular night. At 4:40 I saw the headlights in the distance. One vehicle coming from the south, moving at normal highway speed, nothing unusual about the pattern. I turned toward the service window and watched it approach. Past the last lamppost, at the far edge of where the light reached and the dark began, something was standing in the field. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Gaunt, the kind of thin that had too much frame for the skin covering it. Limbs too long, angles in the wrong places. The antlers spread wide above it, massive branching shapes that caught none of the light from the lane and seemed to take some of the dark with them instead. Its face was pointed toward the booth. I held its gaze for half a second before I caught myself and looked at the approaching headlights instead. Rule 4. Pretend you don't see it. I'd followed Rule 4 hundreds of times. It never got easier. It just got more practiced. The car reached the window. A young woman, college-aged, music playing from her stereo, completely ordinary. I processed her toll, thanked her, watched her drive north. She had no idea what was standing 60 feet to her left. That was the point. That had always been the point. I touched the coin on its little stand and felt the cold of it move up through my fingers. Behind me, the booth hummed. Around me, the highway was empty in both directions, quiet and lit and ordinary. And at the edge of the light, the tall shape stood in the field and watched me work, its black eyes catching nothing, its vast antlers still, patient in the dark the way something is patient when it has been waiting since before there was anything here to wait for. I reached under the desk and took out the folded index card I'd started keeping there 2 weeks ago. New rules, added in my own handwriting below Daryl's 7. Number 8 from Margaret. A note about the coin stand. A reminder about the Wednesday schedule. At the bottom I'd written one line in capital letters. The hunger always grows. Not as a warning, just so I didn't forget. If you're driving on SH 130 late at night and you come to booth 19, pay your toll and move on quickly. Don't ask why the collector has a silver coin on the counter. Don't mention the small bandage on their thumb. Don't ask about the index card taped to the desk, or the iron nails in the corners, or the thin line of white crystals along the floor. And if you see headlights coming up behind you in a flashing pattern, 2 short, pause, 3 short, pause, 2 short again, don't slow down to watch. If you see a blue pickup truck with the license plate LVS2HNT pulled off on the shoulder, keep your eyes on the road ahead of you. If something tall and wrong catches the edge of your headlights in the fields beyond the toll plaza, keep driving. Don't look twice. The toll collector in that booth has made arrangements so that you can drive through safely. Those arrangements have a cost that you don't have to pay and that you don't want to know about. But I want you to understand that the cost is real. That it is paid weekly, that it grows a little larger every month, and that somewhere in those dark fields, patient as stone and hungry as it has always been hungry, something is watching every car that passes through that lane. It has been watching yours for some time now. Keep driving.